Welcome to jQuery plugins. So before we get started, just as like a show of hands or like a group groan or something like that, how many people had trouble either during project week or when you're working on your portfolios implementing something like a cool hover effect? So like when you hover over a picture, it brings up text, or something like getting your nav bar at the top of your portfolio page to stay fixed at the top as you scroll down. People all have trouble with that? Some hands, some quiet nodding. It's the afternoon, I get it. Cool. Yeah, so I've had trouble with that a lot, and jQuery plugins are tools that you can use that will help you through certain issues like that. So the idea of a jQuery plugin is basically to extend the prototypal functionality of jQuery. So you guys got into that whole like objects and prototype stuff last week, or yesterday, last week, something like that. So jQuery plugin or jQuery on its own is a function that has a prototype within it as well. And so plugins are essentially an extension of that prototype. It's adding those methods to the jQuery object, and I'll get into a little bit more specifics in a little bit. So if you think about something like the .hide method, right? Our .hide method in jQuery is changing some sort of CSS property in JavaScript, right? So that's sort of like a plugin that comes, or a method that comes with jQuery to start out. Plugins are something that we would write on our own, or that other people would write on their own. Yep. So it's something that you guys can write, and we'll actually get into that in a little bit. We'll write our own plugin later today. But it's basically an idea where if you guys are struggling, again, with keeping your nav bar fixed at the top of the page, you don't need to necessarily recreate the wheel and try to struggle through it all on your own. There are plugins that you can actually literally put in a class on your nav bar that will save it or fix it to the top without having to go through all the mess of figuring out the CSS on your own. It's not necessarily perfect. It doesn't always work, but it makes life a lot easier for a lot of complicated CSS options, or sort of other jQuery option that you would have to figure out on your own. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So table sorter. Table sorter is literally a plugin that allows you to sort tables that you've created. So you'll see here, it sorts the entire table by age, total, discount, difference. Everything is changing with it, right? So that is something that would actually take a lot of code for you to figure out how to write, right? That's not the easiest thing to do. In this case, you'll see if you want to read through this later, it's pretty much just adding a class of table sorter to your table. And someone else has already written all of the JavaScript that changes your CSS and changes the functionality underneath your table to allow you to do this sort of sorting. All right? So another one. This is even kind of a cooler example. So this is called isotope. So this is some cool functionality, basically that sorts and filters the periodic table based on a plugin that they've created. It's not necessarily something that you might use all the time, but it's pretty cool to look at, and it does a lot of really cool things. I think you can actually implement isotope with other sorting options as well. It doesn't have to be the periodic table. But it provides a really cool look into something that a plugin would do. So the actual code behind this to get this going isn't that complicated once you use that plugin, the isotope plugin. So again, why do we really care here, right? In this class right now, we're not going to be learning anything new in terms of code, right? You guys have had jQuery intro, you guys have practiced your jQuery. So we're not going to learn a lot of new code specifically here. We're going to dive into like the source code behind some of the plugins, but we're not actually going to learn any sort of new functionality or any sort of new like language or any sort of new library necessarily. But as I said before, there's no need to recreate the wheel on a lot of different functionality you would want to add into something like your portfolio or your project, right? So tomorrow you're going to be doing a refactoring of your project one. So this could be something good to use where if you want to implement a jQuery plugin to your project, you can try doing that. But again, the idea is that there are a lot of people that have been doing this for a really long time, and they try to make our lives easier by creating these plugins. So on that note, I'm going to have you guys do a little bit of research on your own. Just look into sort of the isotope plugin that I was just showing you, or one called Packery, or the table sorter one that I showed you as well. Just do a little research on your own for maybe 10 minutes. Kind of look at how you would implement it. How do you use a plugin? What's the common theme between plugins in terms of how they're implemented, or in terms of where you put them in your code? And then just look for sort of convention. Think about this for about 10 minutes. Just do a little bit of reading, try to practice around with it a little bit, and then partner up for 10 minutes, and we'll bring it back to the group and answer some questions. So I'm going to put 10 minutes up on the board to start. 10 minutes. So feel free to just get started sort of doing some research. I forgot to Slack out the lesson plan. Does someone already do that by any chance?
Isn't it the same as the other classroom?
Yes, it is. Cool. So it's in the classroom for Slack, apparently, because Becky is faster than me. Yeah, all right. So let's go ahead and do some research. And in 10 minutes, I'll kind of shout out. And then just partner up and start talking about, there's some questions at the bottom here. Just kind of talk through those questions. Think through it first, and then talk through it with your partner.
I think the jQuery link in the scope of sequence page takes you to something else.
Oh, all right. Cool. Let me actually Slack it out then. Oh, looks like Adrian slacked that out too. But yep, it should be there.
In the table sorter link that you have? Oh, no, never mind. When I first did it,
Cool.
something with
Sounds good. Just one more chord for me to trip on. You guys are allowed to start talking earlier than 10 minutes too, if you want.
This one won't do it. You know, I mean, you know why that is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure that's it.
So
That's pretty cool.
they don't have to.
That's
why I started using the child here playing with the robot.
Yeah.
What?
That's so weird. You should see the notice.
Is it updates?
Good day. I mean, it didn't hurt. They have like a GitHub or something. You can try to contribute those open source.
I don't know, they're wanting to pay already, so I'm kind of like,
Yeah, that's weird. I noticed that before. It's weird. That shouldn't be the case. But you know, we always talk about open source contributions. They're pretty cool. Let's compare on fixing that. See if they have their GitHub account here. See if they have their code.
it's a 3-year subscription.
Yeah. Oh, you guys can start pairing up a little bit and maybe have a little discussion. We can jump over to
Give her
they basically create for you. Like you can basically choose a template and just put it in. You don't know. There's some areas where you can go in and upload yourself. That helps SEO, but otherwise they do for you. So you pay, even though they're free. It's interesting how this really happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the implementation. Yeah, just downloading it.
When you
Yeah, like when you're making they start off like this. That's what happened to you on my side. I was says that they try to keep minimize the plugin footprint. So they're all just in general. I don't know what else every plugin has. There's shitty ones out there. Yeah, seriously.
saying it's like jQuery essentially because
oh, I see what you're saying.
Maybe something that's like
There we go.
How are people feeling? You guys masters at jQuery plugins already? You guys know how to
Is that a running joke?
run and choke?
Are you masters of jQuery? Like, oh!
Try to take a look at like the source code in one of the plugins. So we're going to dive into it a little bit more, but try to see what's different in the plugins as opposed to something that you've already seen in jQuery.
so what is the plugin about?
How are you guys feeling about plugins here? Do you what's any thoughts?
They look awesome.
They look long.
Theoretically.
Like the source code, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just goes on and on.
Yes, it does. Hence why you get to use them instead of
Not
actually
do it yourself.
doing it yourself.
Yeah.
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 Well, it'll be tested the end. You have to rewrite all of that.
I got that in 15 minutes, no problem.
Sound good.
Got the prototype. I've heard of those. Well,
That's all that you really need, right?
Proto. So
Which-
I don't
which
know.
one is that?
We dropped the types.
Drop the types.
These is the Thackeray. Magic's related.
Yeah, so that was like a prototype thing that was a nice little hint into what these are. It's like settings. Setting up prototype on there. So we should talk about that. Yeah.
My friend made that.
Yeah,
Cool.
really,
It's really fast. Oh yeah.
you know what I like about this one?
Sorry, users are crazy.
As it is, just So many options that could do.
Oh, see, that's it.
Okay, so yes.
jQuery, JavaScript,
The one that has an SMS.
or HTML.
Oh,
So,
yeah. So it is breaking. Yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
So like find words that have no
All right, people want to bring it back together maybe and talk about this a little bit more. I'm gonna pause that. All right. Nope. Stop. So, basic question: where do we find jQuery plugins?
In the wild.
In the wild. What does that mean?
You have to hunt these.
Yeah, that's there you go. Go hunting for them. What does that mean though? Google it. Yeah, I mean, pretty much, yeah. Like, if you could pretty much find a jQuery plugin for almost anything, right? And so, as it says here, there is a list. There's a kind of browser of jQuery plugins here, and they're also, I know you guys are looking at like top 50 plugins. There are lists like that all over the place. I think I actually linked to them a couple of them at the bottom. But yeah, unofficially, Google is your best bet. Not surprisingly. Google, yeah, sure. I know. I mean, let's be honest. Google is your best bet in most cases when it comes to development, right? Like, not asking us or anything like that. So in terms of like the basic anatomy, what are people's thoughts? Like, you guys looked at either the code or sort of like the basic ways to actually use a jQuery plugin. Does anybody see examples of that? So when you're I saw most of you guys playing around with it, but in terms of actually like calling a plugin in the code, do you guys see how that went? Any thoughts?
Well, at least the one that I looked at, they were calling the HTML element to kind of like activate the plugin. So I was trying to see like how that works, because when I was looking at it, it puts like images into the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering like when you put something in, I was trying to find where it kind of drops that in there, and I couldn't find that, but I did see that it was calling the div in a few areas.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly which one's trying to get into the exact example, but in terms of like just calling a class on an HTML element, a lot of times that's exactly how you would call the jQuery plugin. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other examples maybe? No? Yeah.
Pretty much after your jQuery selector, you like add that factory or that isotope after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's pretty similar across different programs.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. So it's pretty similar to doing like a .hide or a .show or something that jQuery already has, right? Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Cool. So then I guess, that's going to cheat. So in terms of how to install, do you guys see like installation instructions in any things you've researched? How do you go about doing that? Any thoughts? I'm going to call on somebody else real quick. Someone else? There we go. Yep.
I just saw that you can kind of do it like an SRC and source to a link to whatever you can download the library.
Yeah, exactly. So basically similar to how you would call jQuery, right? Yeah, exactly right. And you guys will get into this a little bit later on in the course as well. We have what we call package managers. So there's like NPM or I guess gems, which isn't exactly a jQuery thing. But so those kind of package managers will also help you install sort of similar things to jQuery plugins as well. So moving on, I'm just kind of giving an example of how to actually implement one. So we're going to do the fixed content plugin. So I'm going to run through the code and we'll kind of talk through a couple different lines of the code. I'm going to do this, and maybe if you guys could try not following along on your computers. Try to understand what I'm saying, but try not to follow along on your computers. Just sort of like kind of get a feel for what I'm doing here. And then I'll go through some of the lines of code as well, and then feel free to ask me questions. So this is actually what I was talking about at the beginning of class. This plugin is one of the ones that will help you like fix something to the top of your page, right? Fix like a nav bar to the top of your page as you scroll, right? So it's a pretty basic one, and we'll get into sort of the source code of it, as you can see in a second. But we'll just kind of go through how to implement it and answer questions along the way. So first things first, let's actually just take a look at the source code. This is obviously not the entire thing. This is just a very basic skeleton of the source code. But what here looks either weird or similar to what you've learned already. So obviously you see like a bunch of dollar signs and stuff, but like what parts of it look kind of weird for jQuery? Yeah.
It's the entire function is wrapped and then called
Yeah.
at the same time. It's like a anonymous, run immediately type weird thing.
Yeah. Actually, you define exactly what I was going to get into in a little bit, but it's what we call an immediately invoked function or an iffy. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
This is my first time seeing dollar sign and dot and then something because
Okay.
we've seen it so far with dollar sign and then the parentheses
Yeah.
and then whatever it's
Mhm.
doing.
Yep, and I'll get into exactly what that means in a second as well. Yeah, anything else? Any similarities what you guys have done before? So like, what about this line here? What do we think that's actually doing? I guess there's a comment right above it, but I can't read the comment, so. Any thoughts without looking at the line above? Yeah, I see you staring at the right line, it's cool. Go for it.
If the length of the content is greater than 0, then do this operation.
Close, yeah. So it's actually if the length of like selected objects
Yeah.
with this class is greater than 0. Is that kind of what you're going for?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Yeah. So basically, if it's greater than 0, then do something, and then that something is this $FN fixed content function that we're creating, right? So does anyone have an idea of what this $.fn is doing? Yeah, Matt.
Is it taking the place of like the document? So like kind of like addressing the whole page. So that when you go to fix the line at the top of the screen, it's calling on the whole document versus one section of the code, for instance.
Sort of. So it's not quite. So actually, this is taking place. So I think on Friday in your prototype, or Monday, whatever day it was that you guys did prototypes, right? So this is actually taking place of your jQuery prototype. So this is literally setting this fixed content function or method to be within your prototype. So it's the same thing as if we wrote, I think it's what is it, jQuery prototype, right? Oh, no. So if we just write jQuery here, you see it's a function, right? And within that function, as you guys I think went through the other day, this has like a prototype with different methods within. So like the hide and show, right? So that $.fn is similar to saying set your prototype to this function or add this function to your prototype. Does that make sense? Cool. And then here is basically calling your actual function. So to go back to what John was mentioning before, this sort of like weird immediately invoked function, as we call it, right? So this is what we call an iffy, or immediately invoked function expression. Basically, it is exactly as you said, John. So it's an anonymous function that's called immediately. So it's exactly as it's called. So the reason that we do that is because we don't want to wait at any point. We want this to be available to us at any point in time, right? So we're creating this function and calling it immediately so that we can then use it whenever we want. One other thing here. Does anyone know why we're passing jQuery here and we have this $sign here? Does anyone think of why we might need to do that? This is kind of a stretch. So, any thoughts? Yeah, Matt.
My guess is that it relates to, I guess, the plugin. I guess when it's going to take in any argument that is wrapped in like the jQuery like selector hash.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So basically, jQuery, as we know, as I just typed into the console just before, right? jQuery is a function that is usable, right? Or it's a library that has a list of functions. So we are literally passing in that library into this immediately invoked function, right? And the $sign is essentially the parameter that we're using in place of that jQuery. So we could literally type jQuery here instead of the $sign and it would still work. The reason we have the $sign here, and as you'll see kind of later on in the course, is there are other libraries and other packages that use the $sign as well, right? So things like Angular, you'll see that coming up in week 8 or whatever. Angular uses the $sign in various situations. There are a lot of other libraries that use the $sign. So this is basically taking this $sign and putting it within the scope of your function so that no other $signs that happen elsewhere in your code will ever come and actually mess up your plugin. You'll see most plugins, almost all of them, are created similarly to this, where you're passing in this $sign so that the plugin is, so that the $sign is always maintained within the scope of that function. Does that make sense? I know it can be a little bit confusing. At least I was confused for a while. Yeah.
So in this example, if the jQuery down inside of the argument and calling that $sign like function.
Sorry, say that again.
If the jQuery inside of the argument, I guess the function right at the bottom calling $sign inside of the argument at the top.
So it sort of flipped it actually, right? So this is our input. So we're passing this jQuery in, and this is the parameter. So the input is basically going into the parameter here. So we're passing this jQuery into the $sign to say this $sign now basically takes all of the functionality or all of like the pieces of this jQuery object. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah. So I kind of already went through the iffy idea. Do you guys have any questions on that? It's something that you don't really need to worry about right now. So as it said, it's an aside. That's something that you'll again get into a lot more during Angular. This is just a very kind of just to call out what it is. But it's something that in Angular is much more noticeable and you'll be using a lot more. But yeah, any sort of questions at all, or are we good to move on there? Yeah, John?
I just had so when you're passing in an object to an immediately invoked function like that, is it efficient in that it doesn't like copy the entire object? Does it create a lot of overhead, I guess, when you pass it in like that, or does it just kind of access the object and then like use it there efficiently as just like a reference, pass it in?
Yeah, I think it's more passing as a reference. It's not actually passing in all of the content, so it's making like a double copy of it. Yeah, good question. Yeah, cool. So let's get into this a little bit. Let's actually implement one of these. Does that sound good? Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just make my basic folders here. So, nope. All right. So let's see into that. You guys mind that I copy and paste this instead of type it all out? As you can see, I kind of make some typing errors pretty quickly. So, one more. Cool. All right. So a little bit of this is going to be copy and pasting, and I apologize for that. It is a lot of code, and I feel like you guys don't really want to see me just sit in silence and type out a bunch of HTML. So let's go ahead and pull up the raw. So this is the entire raw script of the fixed content plugin. So not a ton, but it's still a decent amount here, right? And there are obviously plenty of other ways to like fix your navbar to the top of your page. I've seen plenty of people do it pretty easily, and it took me a long time, but eventually I got it around to work. But this is just a really good option to help you do it without having to worry about the CSS, right? So as we said before, basically all it's saying is if you add a class of JS fixed content onto some HTML element, then it's going to do all of this. The nice thing about this is that the source code is right here. And you can see it's setting like the margin top to 24. It's setting the min width to 767 and the z index to 500. This is something that you can actually go in and change if you wanted, right? So if you downloaded the source code and used it in your files, like we're about to do, well, not download it, we're going to copy and paste it. But if you use that and put it into its own file, you can then change it however you want. That's one of the other really nice things about these plugins is that, yes, they might be a little bit complicated, but they're also out there for you to change. They're all, typically, I know there's one that you have to pay for, maybe if you go commercial, but typically they're free, they're open source, they're on GitHub, so the code is there for you to look at and for you to manipulate if you really want to. And that's sort of kind of the point of this class as well, is that we're going to go in, we're going to look at the code, we're going to build our own as well, so that you guys later on can go in and play around with jQuery plugins, and if there's some point where you need to make maybe a small change, you'll actually know where to look. So let's go ahead and take this. So I'm going to put this into my fixed content.js file. So this is the same thing as if I had downloaded it. It's just a little bit easier right now so that we can avoid any like internet issues. And then here is my sweet HTML file. This is one of my more creative websites that I didn't even create. All right, cool. So let's open this up real quick. Open. So you'll see here, we got our hello at the top and a bunch of Latin, which I was a Latin major, so I could actually probably read some of this at some point, but not now. So anyway, so let's say our hello up there is actually like a header that we want to leave at the top, right? So as we scroll down, we want to leave that header, or we want that header to follow down, right? So all we would have to do is add our class of JS fixed content to our index. Let's go ahead and save that, and let's refresh the page. So something weird happened, but you'll see that it actually still sits there, right? Can anyone think of like what might have happened here that's kind of weird? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that kind of screws things up a little bit, right? So this is sort of an example where a jQuery plugin might go a little bit wrong. But the nice thing is that it allows you the flexibility where you can still change this up a little bit, right? So we've added this in. All we need to do still is add in like a CSS selection of the header, right? And we can say margin top, no, margin bottom. And let's just put 10% for now, right? So you'll see here, that just fixed it right away. So if we look at the elements, so we've put a margin below that header now. So that's breaking everything up. And so now as we scroll, this is still going to happen, which is still kind of an issue, right? But at least at the top, it's set it up so that it's not sort of falling behind everything. We could go through how to fix all of it, but I'm probably not going to do that right now. But you can see here, this at least gives you a good starting point where then you can play with CSS to get it so that it's not falling behind your text or anything like that. Yeah.
So how does the CSS and that I guess override the JS or screw up what you're doing with the JS file?
Yeah, that's a great question. So your HTML, right, is reading from top to bottom, right? So the CSS is being called first. And then once the page is loaded, then your JavaScript file is being called. So technically, the CSS won't override that plugin. So if we tried to put a margin top on this H1, that wouldn't work because in the fixed content here, there's already a margin top, right? But the reason it worked here is because we put it on the header instead. So this is all just affecting the one element that we actually put the class on. So since it's wrapped in this header, we can still affect it by like kind of putting the CSS on the header instead. Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. Does anybody else have any other questions on it? Yeah.
Could you put the JavaScript, or sorry, the jQuery function in the general body of HTML and then format it CSS to get the same way? Like, what's the best practice in terms of like, let's say you don't know which layer you want like, to be relative to which layer. Would you just put like the JS fixed content in a general tag by itself, and then modify the CSS so certain elements are above others?
So you're saying just like put it in an empty tag somewhere? So that would just fix like that empty tag onto the page. But since it's empty, then you wouldn't really notice it at all, right? So this is kind of a small example. Like there are plenty of other plugins that'll help you sort of like space out your text a little bit. So you guys saw like I think it was like the Packery one where it's like setting up different grid systems basically, right? So that might be a little bit more helpful in that instance where you're trying to like really set up different parts of your page. For this, it's literally just trying to fix one thing at the top of your page or at a various part in your page. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Connor?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, so basically we've gotten into this a little bit already. So I guess at this point we can go on break if you guys want. Does anybody have any questions on this? Yeah.
So I
when does your JavaScript over? So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, 'cause you already like, I guess, put the margin top and the widths in JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't change that in your CSS.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, in this case, right? So we're calling our CSS. So when we call our CSS file, right? This is part of like when it's loading the HTML. So it's loading the HTML and it's rendering everything based on what we put in the CSS. But then once it does all that, then it's going to come and render this script file. So any of the CSS like changes that we made within the script file are all going to happen second. So anything there is going to override whatever we put in that CSS file first. But, so I think maybe what might cause some confusion is that here I put in margin bottom, not margin top. So in the JavaScript file, it's setting a margin top. For us, we're setting a margin bottom here, just to like put in that extra space below. Is that, you know what you're saying?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah,
Let's go.
go for it.
Okay, so I guess if you add more your nav list items,
Mhm.
and you have to add that class name to each of those list items,
Mhm.
would it then create multiple like rows of the title, or would it know to compact them all in a single line and add your nav line?
Yeah, this one, so this specific one is pretty basic. So my guess is that it would probably stack them one on top of the other. There will be other ones that you could research that will help you do that. But as far as I know, this one is like a very basic plugin. So if you put a class on something, if you put a class on like one element and then the same class on like the element below it, it will fix them, but it will fix them one and then the other like that. Yeah, that's a good question though. All right, so let's go on break. When we come back, we are actually going to start implementing our own plugins, or using plugins in a group. So go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll bring it back together. So 3:26. So,
I guess next question is in the same example of adding the class to each individual, because you then go in your CSS and
Mhm.
like tell it to like inline block it, and
Mhm.
then
yeah.
it'll work.
Yeah, so maybe what you could do is you could put this class.
In your CSS.
Well, so it wouldn't work in your CSS, but you could put it like here, right? So in the header, and then if you had like an H1 and had like a I don't know P tag or something like that, right? These then you could CSS to like be inlined together, and they would all, I think. I'm gonna go